There are lessons to be learned every week of the fantasy football season. Here are 10 lessons I learned in week 7. Starting with that Sunday night game, and maybe, just maybe, Russell Wilson is about to unlock George Pickens. When you look at George Pickens' usage in that Sunday night game, it was as good as could be expected. He had 9 targets, which was less than only 4 other wide receivers in week 7. He had 151 air yards, which was second only to DK Metcalf in week 7. And he was 4th in expected fantasy points. Plus, he was also 6th in first read percentage at 40%. The major difference to me between Russell Wilson and Justin Fields as it pertains to George Pickens is the fact that Russell Wilson will take those deep shots. He will give his guys chances to make plays. Russell Wilson will throw those moon balls down the field and say, hey, go up and make a play for me. I'm not ready to say already that Russell Wilson is going to unlock George Pickens. It's only been one game here, albeit it was a good game if you have George Pickens, and it was great to see, especially against a defense like the Jets. But you got to be more encouraged about George Pickens with Russell Wilson going forward. I think at least now we can consider George Pickens a solid start rest of the season. But we have to consider Joe Mixon more than a solid start rest of the season. In the 3 healthy games he has played this year, he is the RB1, outscoring all other running backs by 13 fantasy points in PPR leagues. And it's not like he's just getting lucky here, like a big run or, a bunch of lucky touchdowns. No, he is outpacing every running back in expected fantasy points in those 3 games as well. The craziest thing to me about Joe Mixon this year isn't that he's doing well in Houston. I mean, when he signed in Houston, it's like, okay, I guess I got to be in on Joe Mixon this year. What's crazy to me is how good Joe Mixon has actually looked this year. I don't think it's crazy to say this is the best Joe Mixon has maybe looked ever, like in his entire career. Even back with the Bengals when he was putting up good fantasy seasons, he wasn't one of the most efficient running backs. He has been absolutely great this year, ripping off long runs, breaking tackles. Maybe getting behind this Houston offensive line is like the fantasy football fountain of youth for Joe Mixon or something. I don't know, but let's not question it at this point. Joe Mixon looking like he might be one of the best picks anybody made in 2024 fantasy football drafts. If you got Joe Mixon, just keep riding him rest of the season. This guy truly could be a league winner. And if you're enjoying the video, if you're getting value out of it, take a second, please. Hit that like button, subscribe. We would greatly appreciate it. And while the rise of Joe Mixon has certainly been surprising this year, the fall of Travis Etienne has been possibly the most surprising storyline of 2024. And now we got to really wonder, when he comes back from this hamstring injury, is this even still his backfield, or has Tank Bigsby completely taken over? And he has been, without question, better than Travis Etienne this season. I really wonder, does Travis Etienne come back and just fill in that Dearness Johnson role, that pass-catching change of pace role? Tank just looks like the better runner, and I think Tank Bigsby will be the RB1 in this backfield going forward. Now, of course, Tank Bigsby is going to be very game script dependent, as we've seen, because of his lack of pass catching. But when he has a good matchup, or a matchup that seems like favorable game script, like what we saw on Sunday, I think you got to roll with Tank Bigsby in your lineup on those weeks. And Travis Etienne, when he comes back, might be nothing more than a PPR flex type of play. Let's keep going with that league winner theme, and let's talk about Brock Bowers at the tight end position. This guy has all the makings of a league winner at tight end this year. If you look at the games where Devontae Adams has missed with his hamstring injury, Brock Bowers has a 26.9% target share in those games. He has 13 more expected fantasy points than second place George Kittle over that stretch. The only thing that is keeping him from absolutely breaking fantasy football right now is the lack of touchdowns. He has only scored 5.9% of his fantasy points from touchdowns this year, whereas George Kittle has scored almost 30% of his fantasy points from touchdowns. Now, this could, of course, be an issue going forward because he's on the Raiders, and I mean, it's either going to be Gardner Minshew, at least in the short term. Maybe they'll go back to Aiden O'Connell, but who really cares? They're both terrible. But with this kind of usage and with the talent of Brock Bowers, this guy's giving you one of the highest floors in fantasy football right now at any position. And if he does start finding the end zone, if he does start scoring touchdowns, he absolutely will be a league winner rest of the season. There are very few guys I would say I will not trade right now, but Brock Bowers is one of those guys. Before I get to the rest of the lessons, let me remind you, if you haven't tried Underdog Fantasy yet, this is a great time because all new customers are going to get this Matthew Stafford new customer special on Thursday Night Football. He just needs 1 yard and you get an easy win right there. And if you join now for the first time using promo code ENDGAME, you're also going to get a deposit match up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Take advantage of it, use that cash, put it on the Stafford pick, and get a W right out of the gates. All right, we all saw the Deshaun Watson Achilles injury. We know his season is over, but this could actually be a good thing for the Browns passing attack. When you look at the second half last week with Dorian Thompson-Robinson and Jameis Winston playing under center, both David Njoku and second-year wide receiver Cedric Tillman benefited big time from this injury. In the second half alone, David Njoku had 8 targets and 2 end zone targets, including a touchdown, and Cedric Tillman had 9 targets in the second half alone, including the end zone target. Now, at the time I'm recording this, the Browns have not announced who will be starting in Week 8, but I don't think it really matters. I think both Cedric Tillman and David Njoku are going to get a big bump, whether it's DTR or Jameis Winston. The one guy who didn't get a bump was Jerry Jeudy. Maybe that will change going forward, but right now I think Njoku and Tillman are the guys you have to have the most interest in. If Njoku was dropped in Week 7, I think he's a must-add at the tight end position. He's looking like a strong start going forward. And Cedric Tillman is a 100% a must-add off of waiver wires and looks like at least a flex play going forward. Now, there are some other running backs who have kind of come out of nowhere that look like strong starts going forward, like Javonte Williams, Kareem Hunt, but I want to talk about Alexander Mattison because after leading all running backs in expected fantasy points in Week 6, he was 5th among all running backs in expected fantasy points in Week 7. Now, if you watch my 10 stats video, I said, hey, fire up Alexander Mattison as a spot start in a good matchup. And while he didn't smash, he was very solid with 15 PPR points, and he dominated this backfield even with Zamir Whiteback. He handled 80% of the carries in Week 7 and had all but one of the running back targets. He's looking like a true workhorse running back and looking like the guy people thought they were getting last year when they drafted him. Maybe it just took him a year to get rolling here. But whatever the case, any running back getting the volume that Alexander Mattison is getting is worth a weekly start as an RB2 outside of the toughest matchups. Now, I do have to say, unfortunately this week, he has one of those toughest matchups as they go against the Kansas City Chiefs, who are the best run defense in the NFL right now. But after that game, he gets the Bengals and the Dolphins. Those are definitely great spots for him. And even this week against the Chiefs, based on volume, he is still at least startable. But Alexander Mattison looking like a great waiver wire pickup at the running back position if you added him a few weeks ago, and looks like he has taken over this Raiders backfield. And I got to talk about another tight end, and that is Kyle Pitts. Is it finally happening for Kyle Pitts? I mean, he hasn't been incredible the last few games, but he's 5th among all tight ends in expected fantasy points over the last 3 games, and he's 4th in actual fantasy points over that stretch. But what's really encouraging here is he has 2 games with 7 catches in the last 3, and he's gotten at least 65 yards in each of the last 3 games. The issue here remains the lack of touchdowns. He still only has 1 touchdown on the season. Maybe this is just going to always be the thing with Kyle Pitts. Maybe him and Brock Bowers will kind of share this in common. They get the receptions, they get the yards, they don't score touchdowns. But look, at the tight end position, any guy getting you 65 yards is worth a start, and any guy getting you 7 catches is more than worth a start. Even in that rough Week 7 where Kirk Cousins wasn't very good and the passing attack wasn't very good, he still came through for you in fantasy. It looks like at this point, Kyle Pitts is a set and forget tight end rest of the season. If you held on to him through the rough times earlier in the year, or maybe you scooped him up off the waiver wire after somebody else gave up on him, you should be feeling good. You don't really have to think about the tight end position the rest of the way. But if you have Sam LaPorta, you definitely have to think about the tight end position because he is looking like he's going to be one of the biggest busts this fantasy football season. I talked about him in the panic video, talked about him in the 10 stats video. I'm going to talk about him one last time here. This is your last warning. This guy only has 17 targets in 6 games this year. I know he was a tight end 1 last year. I know you drafted him in the 3rd round. I know you want him to be a thing, but it just doesn't look like it's going to happen for Sam LaPorta this year. And what's going to change to make him a thing? Really, honestly, the only thing I could think that would make Sam LaPorta a thing again is if Jameson Williams got hurt. But honestly, I don't even know if that would be enough because in Week 7, Jameson Williams only had 1 target and Sam LaPorta still only had 2 targets and did absolutely nothing. This guy's target share on the season is less than 9%. There is nobody that can be fantasy relevant getting less than 3 targets, having less than an 8% target share. I don't care who they are. Look, I'm not saying you have to drop Sam LaPorta, but I definitely am saying if you have Sam LaPorta, you need to be streaming tight end. Sam LaPorta cannot be started until something drastic changes going forward, and I don't even know what that would be. And I'm going to give you one last warning on Patrick Mahomes, if you even need a warning here. I've been saying for a couple weeks now, I don't think Mahomes is anything more than a 2 QB super flex option. Like, I don't think he should be started in 1 QB leagues, and at this point, hopefully everybody agrees with me at this because This was another down game for Patrick Mahomes. Even though they scored points in this game, he did almost nothing, and if it wasn't for the fact that he ran in a touchdown on what was going to be a designed pass play, he would have done nothing in this game. Obviously, losing Hollywood Brown in the first preseason game was a massive blow, but losing Rashee Rice was an even bigger blow. All the expectations that this was going to be back to this high-powered passing attack is now out the window because Xavier Worthy, while sure he could develop as the season goes on, is not even close to there yet. Travis Kelce, who knows what's going on with Travis Kelce, and somehow Kareem Hunt has looked rejuvenated in this offense, and when they get near the goal line, they just give it to Kareem Hunt and he scores a touchdown. Maybe as the season goes on and Worthy develops as a wide receiver, Mahomes can crawl back into low-end QB1 status, but even if that happens, if you spent an early round pick on Patrick Mahomes as an elite QB this year, it's looking like a wasted pick, unfortunately. There are some of the lessons I learned in week 7, but if you're going to win in week 8, you need more than just lessons learned. You need to know who to start, who could boom, who to add off the waiver wire. We got everything you need in our week 8 playlist. It's right here.